thank you first off for coming. So you are at the iManage Records Manager customer panel, our panel of one, but fortunately we have Nitza here who has experience with many customers. So in reality, we have a whole bunch of customers all bundled up in one nice package through InfoCompass. So we'll get into that as we go on. But again, just our presenters for today. So I am Andrea. I'm the product manager for iManage Records Manager. And I'm joined by Nitza, the records and information consultant for InfoCompass. So, and I'll give Nitza in a moment to introduce herself when you get to your slide later about the company. So just a quick agenda for today. What we're going to do is we'll do a very brief overview of the product. We'll do an introduction to InfoCompass, and then we'll go through kind of our Q&A panel discussion that we've prepared today and wrap that all up with a quick roadmap of iManage Records Manager. So for quick product roadmap, again, just about 20 seconds here, just to say that, again, iManage Records Manager provides customers with that single interface to manage both electronic and physical content. You'll see through iManage Work, file shares, those external repositories, all through compliant retention, those automated policy assignments, and really it's end-to-end content management from creation to defensible disposition. So I will hand it over to Nitza, and you can introduce yourself and InfoCompass.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Yes, my name is Nitza Medina-Garcia. I'm a certified records manager and the founder of InfoCompass. We are a records management implementation company. And so some of the things that we do, we focus on iManage Records Manager. We have over 15 years experience in implementing iManage Records Manager. We do simple implementations to complex implementations, upgrades, health checks. So if you had IRM in the past and you need some review, we can do that for you as well. Training on iManage Records Manager. And we, as I said, I'm a certified records manager, so really able to make sure that the software meets your business needs as well as your software needs. And we are an iManage certified partner.
Thank you. And yes, we had a very lively discussion earlier today, both as past archivists and records managers, so experts on the topic, and we'll certainly have a lively discussion here ahead of us. So just jumping right into that, I have a couple questions I'll pose, and then we can kind of go from there. But from a product perspective, we encourage customers to make the switch to iManage Records Manager, and in part because we have that seamless integration with Work, managing both physical and electronic content, and again, that end-to-end security that we talked about. But from your perspective, what are some of the main reasons that you see customers making that move to IRM?
So what I've been seeing in the past few years here is that they may have an older records management product that's on a very old server, and so they're trying to get off of that server and that product because there's some security issues with keeping the older software around. So that might be one. In addition, they may have an older software that's not supported anymore. And so that may also be a big driver because they aren't able to call anybody and have them respond. Mm-hmm. They're also looking for an easy way to manage their electronic records. So, finding a way to automatically file into a new system is definitely something they're looking for, as well as just a way to report on what files may be eligible for disposition. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you've really seen those customers coming in that are looking to, automate that retention policy. So from a product standpoint, what we're seeing is, in iManage Records Manager, you have to declare those documents as records to then be managed in IRM, and that declaration process can be automated, as well as the application of retention schedules, whether it's at a matter or file part level. All of that filing, when you're doing that filing, those applications can be automated so that you don't have the end user manual retention schedule application. So, and kind of going off that, are you seeing any trends with kind of what customers are coming to you, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing definitely law firms who are coming and looking to have their records managed. There's also corporate legal departments that are looking to have their records managed. And so I enter into discussions with them to find out, well, can we leverage some of the information they already have, like in a practice management system? So for law firms, that's typical. For corporate legal, they may have a practice management system, they may not. So we can leverage some of the information that's already in their work DMS to be able to generate the information that's needed for iManage Records Manager.
Okay, so we see that variety of customers. And then if you could, maybe give us an example from some customers you've worked with of some of our more simple implementations versus maybe a more complex implementation of iManage Records Manager.
Yeah, so I'm working on one right now that is fairly simple, and so this law firm is moving most of their processes to be digital. So they were really looking for an electronic solution. So we were able to leverage the information they have in their practice management system into IRM, and then we set up the automatic filing of their workspaces into the record software. So now they can do reporting to see what's eligible and do disposition as needed. So that's kind of a more simple implementation. Some of the more complex ones can be maybe they're already on an older software, and that software, such as Autonomy Records Manager is an example, and they may have filed both the electronic records as well as track their physical files. And so what our company was able to do is help them migrate their documents into the document management into Work, because now Work is their single electronic repository for documents, but then any of their physical or even some of the disposition on electronic records, we're able to migrate that into the iManage Records Manager to consolidate where they are looking for retention-related information in IRM.
That's great. Yeah, so we're seeing both, some physical implementations, physical and electronic, and really all of the key features throughout IRM can be applied to both of those. So no matter what the customer is looking for, whether it's a simple implementation or something more complex, all of those key features of IRM are then applicable and made available to those customers.
That's right.
Yeah, that's great. And then, moving on from kind of the implementation, more of the usage and what we're seeing, one of the key design objectives we had with IRM was really to allow for firms to easily implement retention policies. So we've touched on that a bit, but if you could describe how you've helped firms utilize IRM to better manage retention and just speak to that a bit.
One thing that comes to mind is there was a challenge where a firm was just wondering whether they should use iManage Records Manager or just do that initially from, manually try to do retention on Work. And so we spoke about it, and we said, well, you can dispose of electronic records from Work, but it can be very manual process for your technical person. You're going to have to do a search on that client matter, delete all those documents, and then go back, make sure if you have soft delete, then you may have to delete it out of the trash can, and then try to delete the workspace from there. And then hopefully you're also recording that you're doing these deletions. So it's really a lot of manual processes that may not have the disposition, defensible disposition, because you're not recording who did what when, according to what retention schedule. So that can be a challenge, whereas our recommendation, of course, is to use Records Manager, and that allows you to do reports on items that need to be disposed. You can run that by your responsible attorney if that's your process, and then be able to use Records Manager to then do any deletions on the electronic content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so on that electronic side, it is certainly IRM takes away that heavy lifting and can go into the workspaces, process that deletion. As you said, you'll have that full audit trail of when these actions took place so that you have defensible disposition. And even outside of, if you may have noticed on the slide earlier, outside of just the workspaces, that ability to delete documents, that is extended to file shares. So even outside of work, it really extends, or IRM extends that ability to file shares as well, which we're hearing is more and more common, that there's a bit of dispersed data. So to be able to manage what's in work and your file shares, especially as we reach those difficult retention and disposition, and especially with the electronic documents that can pose difficult. So some of what we've already put in place helps to manage both what's in iManage work and then the file shares as well. So we touched on some again, but what do you see as some of the biggest retention and disposition challenges you see firms facing? And in tacking on to that, how do you see IRM serving those issues or helping to alleviate some of the difficulty?
I think part of it is just making sure that you're able to run reports and be able to understand what is eligible for disposition. So being able to record that and going through your process is definitely a challenge. And so records manager is able to assist with that. The other challenge is just being able to have a listing of all the items that are in your matter, whether it's in work, if it's physical, a file share location, CD, DVD, whatever it might be. You can actually create indicators of what is under a particular matter. So I'm hearing from people saying, well, I need to have a data map of what exists for this matter. So you can utilize Records Manager in order to do that. Mm-hmm. Other things that I'm seeing have to do with outside counsel guidelines. So we have a firm that has quite a few outside counsel guidelines. They needed a way to indicate that within iManage Records Manager, as well as have the right retention automatically be applied to the client matter or client groups. And so we were able to leverage features that were already within Records Manager to indicate that items had an outside counsel policy or guideline, and then we added on to it. We were able to, our company created a custom logic, a tool to be able to automatically apply that retention based on either a client, a whole client group, or an individual matter. So it kind of takes a lot of the heavy lifting off of the information governance records team from doing that application manually. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think jumping back to your previous point, just being able to have that single pane of glass where you see all of your content at once. In the desktop client, we've certainly had electronic and physical content represented, and then earlier in the past year, we provided the ability to see electronic content in the web client alongside that physical content. So even for the end users that are looking to have access to that content, we certainly have touched on kind of that management side, but the accessibility side as well, and offering that web client and that single pane of glass to the users to go in and say, if I'm working on X matter, I need to see all physical, all electronic client documents and records in one place, whether it's to request them from storage, or hopefully folks are using the ability to digitize content and then relate that content, the scanned versions, to a physical file to kind of cut back on some of those off-site storage requests we're seeing. So I think some of the accessibility challenges that firms can face as well, that's certainly alleviated with that web client, that single pane of glass. So I see that as well. And
go ahead. And I have to say that's really big right now, because they're trying to move to be more digital or paper light. Mm-hmm. So being able to indicate to your attorneys or paralegals that there's an electronic version of a physical item, mm-hmm. That's going to be great, because then they don't have to recall something from an offsite storage vendor. There's a delay in being able to get that information. So having those connections and indicators right in the web client and the desktop client, is really key.
Yeah, yeah, and I find it so helpful that it's not even just an indicator, but a link that,
Right,
you know,
a link,
it
that's
flags
right.
you and says you have an electronic document, and then you can click on it and it'll take you to the electronic document. So taking out that whole piece of ordering a file or searching for, okay, I see it's there, but where is it? You have that, again, immediate access to
Exactly.
to the information. And I know you had touched on it, and I know we've talked about it in the past, but that review process. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're hearing firms today, you know, one of the more manual processes that firms are having to deal with is the review process for defensible disposition. So whether you have, you know, a general counsel performing reviews, or if it's a matter supervisor or whomever you have performing these reviews, it's currently, from what I'm seeing and from my past working in a law firm, I know our procedure was to print out a physical report of what files were eligible, take that report to the attorney, ask them to check off what we were allowed to destroy, take that back, file that somewhere, somehow link that, and then hopefully at the end of the day destroy the content. But that manual process, it sounds like you're hearing a lot of firms having to go through those manual steps as well.
Sure, you know, and it's still that same process, trying to get the approval for the destruction and keeping track if they've gotten the approval or not. It's still, you know, very manual, and, you know, put on top of that, if you have to also check to see if there's outside counsel guidelines as well. So it can be a very complex process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, speaking to that, or kind of taking a look, I'd love to take a look at kind of our roadmap from that question, because, you know, one of what we see as really the main challenge that the records managers are facing in law firms, that review process. That is an area where, you know, the product has already made great strides in being able to make this a smoother process. So there is the pre-calculated disposition eligibility report, which can be run to see what items are eligible for disposition. And then in the web client, we've already released the disposition eligibility tab, where all of that content, you know, you don't even have to run a report in the desktop client. You see all the files eligible in the web client. You can filter, you can manipulate that data there. And kind of what we're doing is we're extending that story. So beyond the disposition tab, what we're moving into, and if you had the ability to join the SRG presentation yesterday, what we're moving into on our roadmap is the ability to roll out those disposition capabilities. So what I mean by that is just what we discussed as some of those pain points, that approval process within IRM. We'll be offering the ability to send items that are eligible to disposition to an attorney. Right now that's through dashboard notifications that'll say, you know, myself as Ed White, I have 16 items eligible for review. I can do all this in the web client, review those 16 items, or most likely more than that, however many items I have eligible for review, and I can approve or deny those items right in the web client. So that review process is really what we're building into the product now, to take away all of that manual labor and all of the back and forth with attorneys that's all happening outside of the product, which, as we've stated, then becomes harder to track. So when we build the review process into iManage Records Manager, then you'll have your nice audit trail that says, you know, I, Ed White, approved X matters on this date, and you'll have that tracked right in the system. So it's exciting to hear that, you know, obviously we're listening to customers' needs, and that's kind of the second point that we have for March 2023 with CSV and single-click exports of reports. You know, there's really two sides of this. We're certainly hearing the requests from customers, but then we're also just seeing those industry trends with more and more electronic disposition, and how we can answer that call and see how we can help out our customers to better serve them. So those are certainly the first, you know, two items that we have coming up. And then just to point out, you know, future on our roadmap, again, disposition, as it's been the main topic of conversation today. So certainly the capabilities will be released in multiple phases. I know some things that we're looking for in phase 2 are more of a email notification. So I did mention that, right, you know, in the first phase, it'll be a metric on your dashboard where you can go into the web client to do approvals or denials In phase 2, we'll do more of a email notification going out to an attorney to say these items are eligible for review, removing that need to actually go into iManage Records Manager to see what content is eligible. So again, there'll certainly be additional phases of disposition capabilities. And then some other items you'll see here are just extending the extending Records Manager for the web client. So, one of the other areas we touched on is just that accessibility, and we talked about how the web client offers you the ability to see physical and electronic content, but bringing in some more of the administrative tasks into the web client to really offer a fully web-based solution. So I know that I've heard that directly from customers that that's a request, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think having it be fully web like that will allow your flexibility for your records information governance team. If they want to access it from like an iPad or something more mobile, they don't have to do it on the desktop. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is the web client now you can certainly use from a tablet. We know we often have records teams that still work in file rooms and need that mobility. So that's certainly, it's available on the tablet today, but to extend, those more creating events, creating schedules, those types of things, to bring that into the web client. And then just the final point here, Iron Mountain integration, we're looking to do that in a general way so we can apply that to other offsite storage vendors. But again, just that ease of use, being able to perform all actions within IRM rather than having to go to other, other applications or websites to perform those.
Yes.
So, and then I guess, looking at the roadmap and kind of going through what your experience has been with customers, I would just kind of in closing before we get to questions to ask, what advice would you give to firms who are considering moving to IRM?
So I would probably have them talk to their iManage, because they may have already purchased Records Manager as a part of their document management system purchase. So if you have, of course you have the document management system, definitely talk to your iManage rep, because you may already have it and don't know it. So it's just a matter of implementing it. And then, of course, if you're looking for an implementer, definitely look at InfoCompass. We are able to speak to both the business process and best practices in records management, as well as being a leader in implementing iManage Records Manager.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point to say, first check and see what you have, because there's also a lot of, crossover. We've, of course, have the full suite of governance products, so to see how you can tie in with SPM and TM and really use the entire suite of products together, I think is also, something to consider from the onset. So if you have new customers looking to come to IRM, to really consider your entire security infrastructure, especially if you have a strong, information governance program, it really will pull together not just the records piece, but especially, the security side of things as well.
Definitely.
So great. Well, and I think we've left about 5 minutes for questions, so I'd certainly like to open it up to anyone that may have questions. I have a few key takeaways up here, so certainly if anyone has questions from this, just kind of summarizing that, again, the product does provide that single intuitive interface. We do help customers tackle those most difficult retention and disposition challenges. Hopefully some of what we discussed today really highlights that. Both through kind of automated retention scheduling, and then as well moving into disposition, some of what we already have in the product today, and then our roadmap certainly touched on that as well. And just to mention as well, iManage is really committed to the future of iManage Records Manager, so those folks looking to implement IRM, it's certainly nice to know that iManage has, as a company, has certainly made a significant investment in the product, both on adding folks to our engineering team, and then myself, I joined about a year ago with the legal background, so I think the investment, or I know the investment in the product is certainly there. So just a few takeaways, and if that sparked any questions or anything from before, please raise your hand and we can answer your questions. Let's see, we'll start in the front and we'll work our way back.
Do you have a general timeline of when the Iron Mountain implementation integration will be ready to go?
So as far as a general timeline, I don't, we're currently working with Iron Mountain, but there's some testing and some things that we're waiting on Iron Mountain side, so there's a bit of lag time there. Once we have that complete, once we have that testing complete, we'll have a better estimate. So do stay tuned, but that's kind of why it's in the future column, because we're at a point where we're waiting for that last kind of go ahead, and once we get that, it should progress faster. But that's, yeah, it's currently in the future column for that reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for the disposition, deletion of the data in the file shares,
Mm-hmm.
does that require the web client?
So no, so in setting up, so the question was if the web client is required for deletion of content in file shares. So it does not require the web client. What you would do is you would go into your desktop client and you would actually take the path from the file share and create that as an item in iManage Records Manager. And then once it reaches, and you'd apply retention just as you would with work documents. And then when it reaches its eligibility date, for when it's eligible for destruction, then what the product can do is delete at the top level. So if you have a folder and you put in the path for that folder and there are various subfolders, it'll do a top level deletion. So anything in that folder will be destroyed according to the retention schedule. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So what are your future plans for mobility, onboarding and offboarding?
Great question. Yes. So speaking to that, and we talked about that last night, and it didn't even come up. Yeah. So when we talk about thank you. When we talk about kind of the main problems or challenges that records managers are facing, matter mobility is certainly one, and it has a lot of the same manual challenges that disposition does. And I think what's really exciting about the disposition capabilities is that review process, the approvals or denials, a lot of that is very similar to what we see in matter mobility. There's still a process of whether it's a records manager or an information governance professional saying, okay, these items now need to be reviewed because an attorney is leaving the firm. I need to see the full list of items. I need to mark them off as yes, they can go, or no, they need to stay with the firm. So we see that as something that we can use some of the capabilities that we're putting in for disposition. And once we have that in the back end, like on our engineering side, we hope to be able to use some of that capability and create more of a matter mobility workflow, similar with those review process and being able to create more of a quick insight to say, okay, if this attorney's leaving, I need to see all of those matters, and I need to be able to review and, again, indicate whether they're going or staying and track that whole process. So it's certainly a gap, and it's certainly something that we see on the roadmap. I think what's great is that once we get the disposition capabilities in place, I see that there is some of that functionality we can extract and hopefully move a bit quicker on the matter mobility aspect.
What about the inverse? What about
Lateral hires, yeah. So on that side, there's certainly going to be more of a back and forth with our work counterparts, of course, because there'll be more. That'll be very focused on ingestion. So it's certainly it's certainly something that I'm fully aware of and would like to work on as well. For matter mobility, I first see, I think departures is going to be a bit easier for us to pick up on because of those disposition features that we're putting in place. And then the ingestion, that's going to be a conversation that we have with work. I mean, ideally, I would like to see, since it's usually it's the records team that's performing these and getting all of the files, whether physical or electronic, being able to do more of that within IRM and not having to, as records managers, that's really our home, I'll say, is IRM versus work. So being able to, although of course all the documents are going to be stored in work, but being able to kind of have a workflow process through IRM so you can work within what application we're familiar with. Yeah, thank you. That was definitely the other big challenge that we see records managers facing. Yeah.
I'm not the records manager at my company, so I kind of represent removing offices, and there's a whole lot of people, and they're getting a whole bunch
So you have, are you, just to understand, are
We
you,
have records manager, we have over 10. And so these, most of this paper disaster is old clothes files.
Mhm.
And it's just paper everywhere. And they're gonna try to scan it, get rid of the paper,
Mhm.
and upload it. I told them to put it on a drive, and I will upload them to the Close Matters. What I'm understanding though is there a possibility with that product that you have the capability of ingesting that information?
Mhm. And have you run into this? I'm sure you've
Yes.
run into this as well.
So I would say if they're electronic documents, you're going to ingest it into Work just like you would normally do, because Work is the document electronic record repository.
So I won that, so I won that prize, I get to do it.
Yeah, sorry,
But there-
unfortunate.
But there is,
It was a glimmer of hope.
How do you know that you're not scanning your digital records? So you're gonna be creating redundancy. So the first step is to determine
I think we're thinking.
what's one digital, what's a DMS, and what's not. That's a big chance.
Mhm.
And I'll let that challenge go on the records manager's team.
I think you're right.
Yeah, they can play that, and then after they finish what they wanna do, I was just trying to be cheap. Not to bring all that stuff on in the cloud.
Right.
Mhm.
I'll throw them in delete. Apparently that's not a word that, shred and delete is a word. So, you know.
Well, thank you for that question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, and we can touch base. I'll hang around as well to follow up, but it looks like we're out of time up here, so I'm happy to meet up after. Although right from this, we are having a UX session for IRM. So anyone that's interested in feedback on our user interface, you can go to the other side of the building for that session.
All right, thank you.